Hey everyone, welcome to AI Deep Hallucination. Today's interview question: your AI agent needs to connect to external tools, MCP or CLI. Why? This was the architecture debate that blew up the AI scene in Q1 of 2026, and it's becoming a new high-frequency interview question.
I've seen a lot of answers to this. The most common one is CLI saves tokens, so pick CLI. Right.
That's the first trap. The direction isn't wrong, but your reasoning falls apart the moment the interviewer pushes on it. The premise and attribution are both wrong. And actually, the first systematic CLI versus MCP benchmark from August 2025 came to the exact opposite conclusion.
Exact opposite. Who ran it?
Austrian indie developer named Mario Zechner, author of the libgdx game framework, ran a strictly controlled experiment. 3 tasks, 4 tools, 10 repetitions each, for a total of 120 runs. He wrote a tool called Terminal and built both a CLI version and an MCP version, letting Claude Code finish the same tasks through both interfaces. Guess what? The MCP version was 23% faster and 2.5% cheaper than CLI. And his own verdict was just 4 words: truly is a wash.
Wait, that completely contradicts all the MCP burns, tokens articles flooding the internet.
Zechner found something even more counterintuitive. MCP has a hidden advantage. It bypasses Claude Code's bash command safety check overhead. Every time CLI runs a bash command, Claude Code uses Haiku to do a safety review, totaling 1.3 to 2 million tokens. MCP talks directly, the same task only as Haiku processing 35,000. That's not a small difference, it's tens of times larger.
So what's Zechner's actual takeaway?
Zechner's own words translate to, at least in the scenarios he tested, the difference isn't as big as you'd think. What actually matters is tool design quality, documentation, and token efficiency. He also wrote something equally sharp elsewhere in the post. The problem with MCP isn't the protocol itself, it's the badly designed MCPs dumping unnecessary JSON everywhere. And the final line of his conclusion is even sharper. The protocol is just plumbing, tool design is the real thing.
Then why is the internet flooded with data saying MCP burns 4 to 32 times the tokens? Where does that come from?
From a March 2026 company called Scalekit. They ran 75 benchmark tests using Claude Sonnet 4 and 5 read-only GitHub tasks. Side note, Claude has iterated through several versions since, but token bloat is a protocol layer issue, not a model capability issue, so the conclusion holds on newer models. The result, MCP was indeed 4 to 32 times more expensive than CLI. For the simplest task, CLI used about 1,300 tokens and MCP used about 44,000. Even more striking, reliability. The CLI group succeeded every time, the MCP group had roughly 28% failures. Monthly cost for 10,000 calls was $3.20 versus $55.20, about 17 times.
Wait, Zechner says it's a wash. Scalekit says 4 to 32 times. That's a huge gap. Who's right?
Both are right, and that's the pivotal moment in the interview answer. The difference is Zechner tested his own carefully designed Terminal MCP, which exposed just one tool. Scalekit tested GitHub Copilot's official MCP server, which exposed 43 tools. Every call injected the full schema of all 43 tools into context. You just ask, what language is this repo? And the agent has to carry schemas for creating gists, managing webhooks, configuring PR reviews. This isn't the MCP protocol's problem, it's a specific MCP design problem.
Got it, but the interviewer will definitely follow up. Then why did Perplexity drop MCP internally? We covered that in our Perplexity Drops MCP Skills is the Answer episode. Can I just use those data points?
You can reference the core data from that episode. Perplexity's CTO said at the Ask 2026 conference on March 11th that they moved internally to REST plus CLI. But if your answer stops there, you'll still lose points. Because there are 3 common mistakes in this space that our previous video didn't unpack, but interviewers will push on them.
3 of them, let me guess. The attribution of the 72% number, is that one?
Exactly. Many people answer by saying Perplexity's internal test showed MCP eats 72% of context. That's wrong. The 72% comes from an Apideck article, quoting the worst case of some anonymous team, 3 MCP servers, about 40 tools, eating 143,000 of 200,000 tokens. Yaretz quoted this number in his talk, but it's not Perplexity's own internal measurement. If you get the attribution wrong, you're instantly outed as someone who skims Twitter instead of reading the source.
What's mistake number 2?
Mistake 2, disclose conflicts of interest and don't get the direction backwards. The 3 loudest voices have very different motivations. Apideck sells an API integration product, a direct competitor to MCP, so their motivation is anti-MCP. Perplexity is pushing its own agent API to replace MCP, so its motivation is also anti-MCP. But Scalekit is different. They sell an MCP Gateway, so their motivation is actually to support the MCP ecosystem. first prove raw MCP burns tokens, then sell you the gateway that fixes it. This doesn't mean their data is fake. Scalekit's benchmark framework is open source on GitHub and reproducible. And their own conclusion is precisely individuals use CLI, enterprises need MCP plus gateway, which is actually the main source of the enterprise side argument later on. If you can show it's 2 anti-MCP plus 1 pro-MCP, you're already a cut above candidates who just recite numbers.
So Zechner is precious precisely because he has no commercial interest.
Right? He comes from building libgdx, a game framework, pure technical curiosity, no money from any agent company. An independent perspective is the scarcest thing in this whole debate.
And what about the third one? Is it about the timeline of the Perplexity event itself?
Yes, it's the oversimplification of Perplexity's behavior. They announced the internal drop on March 11th, but 2 days later on March 13th, Perplexity shipped custom MCP connectors for Pro, Max, and Enterprise users, letting customers plug in their own MCP servers. And their official Perplexity MCP server is still maintained for external developers. So the accurate statement is, Perplexity's internal production stack doesn't use MCP, but their external product still fully supports it. If you only say Perplexity dropped MCP, the interviewer will counter with, then how do you explain the MCP connectors they shipped on March 13th, and you'll be speechless.
These 3 corrections are really useful. The interviewer's next question is obvious. If CLI is so great, why do enterprises still use MCP?
Here's the second key correction. Most people say enterprises use MCP for protocol standardization. That answer is wrong. The accurate statement is enterprises use MCP not for standardization, but for authorization infrastructure.
Authorization infrastructure? You mean OAuth, but CLI can do OAuth on its own, can't it?
As Rapello AI reports, Yarat said something in his talk. In production, most MCP features are never used. Standardization, dynamic tool discovery, tool enumeration, these selling points are all fake needs in production because the production toolset is fixed and known. So why do enterprises pay this token tax? Because CLI simply can't do 3 things: per-user OAuth authorization, letting each end user grant and revoke access; multi-tenant isolation, making sure Acme's data never ends up in Globex's Jira; structured audit trails, where every tool call has a record of who authorized it in which tenant. These 3 things CLI does through environment-level credentials, and all 3 fail.
So you're saying enterprises aren't paying token costs for standardization. They're paying for OAuth plus multi-tenancy plus audit.
Right? Scalekit has a very sharp line. The same Scalekit with the delicate position because they sell a gateway, they say. The things that make MCP look expensive, the explicit schemas, the OAuth handshakes, the structured responses are exactly what makes it governable. You're not paying a protocol overhead tax, you're paying for authorization infrastructure. And if a CLI agent wants to do the same thing, it has to rebuild half of OAuth from scratch.
Any examples of what happens when you rebuild from scratch?
OpenClaw is the most catastrophic case. We covered it in detail in our episode Under 50 Days to 50,000 Stars. It wasn't technical superiority. By April, it had 346,000 GitHub stars, with 135,000 instances exposed to the public internet across 82 countries. From early February to March, a series of CVEs came out in sequence. The headliner, disclosed in early February, was an 8.8-rated one-click remote code execution. In mid to late March, another batch emerged, including a 9.4-rated WebSocket authorization bypass.
A 346,000-star project with CVEs of this caliber. But your point is, switching to MCP wouldn't save it either.
Can't save it. On top of that, ClawHub has over 800 flagged malicious skills. But here's the important part. This isn't because OpenClaw's code is bad. It's the inevitable result of shell access plus environment-level credentials plus no protocol-level authorization. MCP's STD mode inherits environment credentials too. Just switching from CLI to MCP doesn't fix this vulnerability. The real fix is remote MCP plus per-user OAuth.
So has the CLI camp lost completely?
No, here's where the plot gets deeply ironic. On April 4th, Anthropic cut off OpenClaw's ability to access Claude through subscriptions, forcing users onto pay-per-use API access. According to multiple user reports, heavy users' bills spiked up to about 50 times. On April 10th, Anthropic temporarily banned the Claude account of OpenClaw's author, Peter Steinberger himself, citing suspicious activity. The account was restored within a few hours, and an Anthropic engineer publicly clarified in the comments that nobody had ever been banned for using OpenClaw, and offered to help personally.
Wait, didn't Steinberger just join OpenAI back in February?
Yes, on February 15th, Steinberger and Sam Altman announced it on the same day. Altman posted on X that Peter was coming to drive the next generation of personal agent products. But look at the timeline. Anthropic invents MCP, then Steinberger writes a pure CLI OpenClaw that rejects MCP. Then OpenAI hires him away, then Anthropic cuts off access citing subscription service wasn't designed for third-party tools like this. Then temporarily Mies bans his account. Anthropic never officially said it was targeted at OpenClaw, but the timing is so convenient, the picture speaks for itself. This interview question has long stopped being a technical choice. It's a commercial war between giants for the agent entry point.
So what's the single most ironic part?
Anthropic's own agent product is called Claude Coward, and it launched on April 9th. Guess what it uses to connect to Slack, Google Drive, Gmail, Zoom, all MCP connectors, plus Claude Code channels, which shipped on March 20th, lets Claude Code be driven through Telegram and Discord. VentureBeat literally called it the OpenClaw killer, but channels itself is built on MCP. Anthropic isn't against CLI, it's the inventor of MCP. The real irony is the more the outside world questions MCP, the more Anthropic's own products pile onto MCP.
That picture is so ironic. So is there any sign of the MCP ecosystem collapsing recently?
Quite the opposite. In early April on the 2nd and 3rd, the MCP Dev Summit was held in New York. MCP maintainers from Anthropic, AWS, Microsoft, and OpenAI jointly released an enterprise security roadmap. The Agentic AI Foundation expanded from its founding state in December 2025 to nearly 150 members. And on April 8th, Lucidworks launched an enterprise MCP product claiming to save $150,000 per integration. On April 9th, two things happened on the same day. Google open-sourced a Colab MCP server, and Zoom launched a new MCP connector integrating with Claude Coward. In 1 week, 4 giants dropped 3 new MCP products, plus an enterprise security summit.
3 new MCP products in 1 week? The ecosystem is clearly accelerating. So what should the conclusion of this video be?
CP isn't dead, but the illusion of one protocol rules them all is dead. The decision now depends on who the agent is acting on behalf of. Acting on your own behalf, use CLI plus skills because LLMs have seen Git, curl, Docker, and training data, so there's zero schema overhead. Connecting to hundreds or thousands of tools, use code mode. Cloudflare first introduced the code mode concept in a blog post on September 26, 2025. About 5 weeks later, on November 4th, Anthropic independently arrived at the same conclusion in an engineering blog post on MCP code execution, compressing a Google Drive to Salesforce workflow from 150,000 tokens down to 2,000, a 98.7% reduction. Another 3+ months later, in late February 2026, Cloudflare published a follow-up pushing this idea to its limit. We covered the exact numbers in our Perplexity Drops MCP episode, so we won't repeat them here. And for acting on behalf of another company's employees, use remote MCP plus Gateway.
So what's the complete answer framework for this interview question? I feel like, following your logic, I can layer it.
5 layers. Layer 1 is the data, the Scalekit 75 run benchmark. MCP 4 to 32 times more expensive, 28% failure rate versus 0. Layer 2 separates protocol from specific design. Zechner's counterintuitive benchmark showing bad MCPs let the protocol take the blame, while well-designed MCPs are actually faster. Layer 3 is 3-way divergence. Decide CLI, MCP, or code mode based on who the agent acts for. Layer 4 discloses the conflicts of interest and the 72% attribution. That's your honesty bonus. Layer 5 is the sharpest. Anthropic's own products attacking the CLI camp are still built on MCP. Answering to Layer 3 gets you a pass. Layer 5 gets you excellent.
One last trick question. If the interviewer asks, should our team use skills to replace MCP? How do we answer?
Tell them directly, that statement is semantically misaligned. Skills is a prompt engineering layer knowledge pack, a folder containing a skill file plus scripts plus resources. CLI and MCP are execution layer transport protocols, how the agent invokes tools. Skills works on any layer with CLI with MCP with code mode. In the Scalekit benchmark, CLI plus an 800 token skills file was the highest ROI combination in the entire test. The accurate statement is CLI plus skills replaces raw MCP, or code mode plus skills replaces raw MCP tool calling. A candidate who can call out this trap on the spot is already in the excellent range.
This episode packed so much info. From Zechner's counterintuitive benchmark, to Scalekit's hard data, to the 3 common corrections, to 3-way divergence, to the 5-layer interview framework. It's all there.
What interviewers actually want to hear isn't that you can recite MCP buzzwords, it's that you know when they're wrong and can explain why with token math and commercial incentives. If there's another interview question you'd like us to cover, drop it in the comments. If you found this helpful, hit subscribe and we'll see you next time.